The scorching sun hung like a vengeful spirit over the parched fields of Fort Bowie, Arizona. As Faith Gardner stood at the edge of her dying farmland, the cracked earth beneath her boots telling a tale of desperation that had become all too familiar across the territory in the summer of 1878. With calloused hands pressed against her sunburned face, she surveyed what remained of her once promising wheat crop now, nothing more than brittle stalks collapsing into dust at the slightest touch of the hot western wind. Faith had inherited this 20-acre plot from her father just 3 years prior, following his unexpected passing from pneumonia. At 24, she'd been determined to make something of the modest farm, to honor his memory by coaxing life from the soil as he had done. For 2 seasons, she'd managed well enough, even expanding to include vegetables alongside the wheat that had been her father's primary crop. But this drought, this merciless, unrelenting drought had destroyed everything she'd worked for. "Damn it all," she whispered, the dry air catching her words and carrying them away, much like it had carried away her hopes with each passing rainless day. The water from the creek that bordered her property had slowed to barely a trickle by mid-June. By July, it had vanished completely, leaving nothing but a serpentine depression in the earth where water once flowed. The well was now alarmingly low, providing just enough for her personal needs, but nowhere near what was required to sustain crops. Faith turned and walked back toward the simple 2-room cabin her father had built when he'd first settled the land. Her steps stirred up small clouds of dust that clung to the hem of her faded blue dress. Inside, the cabin was stifling despite the open windows. She moved to the small oak table where her account book lay open, the figures staring back at her with cruel finality. She had $8.17 to her name. The last of her savings had gone to purchase seed at the beginning of the season, seed that now lay dormant or dead in the unforgiving soil. The pantry held enough staples to last perhaps another month if she was careful. After that, a knock at the door startled her from her calculations. Visitors were rare out here, 3 miles from the heart of Fort Bowie. The town had grown somewhat since the establishment of the nearby military fort that shared its name, but Faith's farm remained relatively isolated. She opened the door to find Sheriff Henry Wilcox, his weathered face solemn beneath his hat. "Afternoon, Miss Gardner," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Thought I might check on you. Word in town is the drought's hit you particularly hard out here." Faith straightened her shoulders. Pride was sometimes all a person had left. "I'm managing, Sheriff." His eyes, kind but knowing, took in her thin frame and the tiredness etched in her face. "The bank's been asking about your loan payment." Faith's stomach tightened. The loan her father had taken out to expand the farm had passed to her upon his death. She'd made the payments faithfully until now. "I'll have it," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Just need a bit more time." The sheriff nodded, not believing her but understanding her need to maintain dignity. "Franklin at the bank isn't a patient man, Faith. I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your pa was a good man and a friend." "If you need help, thank you, Sheriff, but I'll manage," Faith interrupted, unable to accept charity even now. "This drought can't last forever." But they both knew that by the time the rains finally came, it would be too late for Faith's farm and her independence. After the sheriff left, Faith sat at her table and allowed herself a rare moment of despair. The loan payment was due in 2 weeks. Without it, the bank would seize her land, her father's land. She had nothing of value to sell, no relatives to turn to. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father had been an only child who'd left his family back east to seek his fortune in the expanding territories. Faith had always prided herself on her self-sufficiency. Even after her father's death, when several of the town's eligible men had made their interest known, she had declined their attentions. She had wanted to prove she could make it on her own, that a woman didn't need a husband to survive. Now, that determination seemed like foolish pride. As twilight settled over the land, Faith's attention was drawn to movement along the road that passed her property. A rider approached, the silhouette unmistakably that of a man on horseback. As he drew closer, she recognized Adam Forrester, whose ranch bordered her property to the north. Adam's spread was considerably larger than Faith's modest farm, nearly 200 acres, dedicated primarily to cattle ranching, with about 40 acres set aside for crops. Unlike many in the area, the Forrester Ranch had access to a natural spring that, while diminished by the drought, still provided enough water to maintain a portion of their crops and livestock. Faith had encountered Adam in town on numerous occasions over the years and had always found him polite but reserved. At 30 years old, he was considered one of the territory's most eligible bachelors, though he seemed more interested in his ranch than in finding a wife. His light brown hair was typically hidden beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes a startling shade of blue that reminded Faith of the summer sky before the drought had bleached all color from the world, rarely met those of others for long. Adam dismounted and approached her porch, hat in hand. Even in the fading light, Faith could see the concern in his expression. "Evening, Miss Gardner," he said, his voice deep but gentle, like distant thunder promising rain. "Saw the sheriff riding away earlier. Everything all right?" Faith's first instinct was to assure him that everything was fine, to maintain the facade of control she'd worked so hard to project. But something in Adam's earnest expression broke through her defenses. "No," she admitted, the simple word carrying the weight of months of worry. "No, Mr. Forrester, everything is not all right." Adam's expression softened. "I suspected as much. This drought's been hard on everyone, but especially those of us trying to work the land." He gestured toward her fields. "Your wheat's gone." Faith nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Mine too, most of it," he said, surprising her. "I've managed to save about 10 acres with water from the spring, but the rest—" He shook his head. "At least you have your cattle," Faith pointed out. "Had to sell half my herd last month," Adam replied. "Not enough grass to sustain them all, and buying feed at current prices would bankrupt me faster than selling at a loss." He paused, studying her face. "But you don't have that option with crops, once they're gone." "They're gone," Faith finished for him. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with the soft sounds of evening, the distant call of a nighthawk, the whisper of the breeze through the withered crops. "Miss Gardner, Faith," Adam said finally, using her given name for the first time in their acquaintance. "I've come with a proposition." Faith tensed slightly. She'd heard propositions before, usually from men who thought a woman alone was an easy target or desperate enough to accept arrangements that compromised her dignity. Adam seemed to sense her wariness. "Nothing improper," he assured her quickly. "It's just, I have more than I need, even with the drought. My spring's still producing, and the 10 acres I saved yielded more than enough for one person." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to such lengthy conversations. "I'd like to share some of my harvest with you." Faith blinked in surprise. "Mr. Forrester, Adam," he corrected. "Adam," she conceded. "I appreciate the offer, truly I do, but I can't accept charity." A spark of something frustration, perhaps, or admiration flashed in his blue eyes. "It's not charity, Miss Gardner, it's being neighborly. My father always said a community survives together or perishes alone." Faith remembered Thomas Forrester, a gruff but fair man who had indeed been known for helping others during hard times. He'd passed away 5 years earlier, leaving the ranch to his only son. Besides, Adam continued when she remained silent, I could use some help with my remaining crops. The hands I usually hire for harvest moved on when I had to sell part of the herd. I'd pay fair wages for your assistance. Faith recognized the offer for what it was, an attempt to preserve her dignity while providing her with much-needed income. Still, she hesitated. Accepting help, even in exchange for work, felt like admitting defeat somehow. Adam seemed to read her thoughts. Pride's a fine quality, Faith, until it stands between you and survival. He glanced at her fields. And I think we're well past that point now. The truth of his words struck Faith like a physical blow. What good was pride if she lost her father's land? What would independence matter if she ended up destitute? I'd be grateful for the work, Adam, she said finally, the words difficult but necessary. And for any help you can offer. Relief crossed Adam's features, followed by a small, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Good. That's good. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll come by tomorrow at first light with a wagon. We can load up some of my harvest for your stores, and then you can ride back with me to start work. As he mounted his horse to leave, Faith called out to him. Why are you doing this, Adam? Really? We've barely exchanged more than pleasantries in town all these years. Adam considered her question, his expression thoughtful in the deepening twilight. Your father helped mine once years ago before you moved here. Loaned him seed when a flash flood washed away half our newly planted fields. Never asked for anything in return. He shrugged slightly. Maybe I'm just repaying an old debt. With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Faith standing on her porch with the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in months. True to his word, Adam arrived the next morning just as the eastern sky began to lighten. The wagon he drove was loaded with sacks of grain, dried beans, preserves, and even a small crate of apples, luxury items in these drought-stricken times. Faith emerged from her cabin dressed in her work clothes, a plain shirt and sturdy trousers that had once belonged to her father. She'd altered them to fit her smaller frame, practical attire for farm work that raised eyebrows in town, but was essential for the physical labor of farming. Adam's eyes widened briefly at her appearance, but he made no comment as he jumped down from the wagon. Good morning, he said, removing his hat. Brought some provisions to see you through. He gestured to the loaded wagon. If you'll show me where to store them. Faith led him to the small root cellar adjacent to the cabin. As they unloaded the supplies, she found herself repeatedly glancing at Adam, trying to reconcile this generous man with the quiet, somewhat aloof rancher she thought she knew. This is too much, she said as Adam set down the third sack of grain. It's what neighbors do, he replied simply. When the wagon was empty, Faith locked the cellar and turned to Adam. Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Will, he interrupted, by helping with my harvest. Speaking of which, we should get going. Daylight's burning. The ride to the Forrester ranch took less than 30 minutes. As they crested a small rise, Faith caught her breath at the sight below. While much of Adam's land showed the same drought damage as her own, a section near the center of the property remained green and vibrant, a testament to the precious water from his spring. The ranch house was larger than Faith's cabin, but still modest by some standards, a well-constructed two-story structure of timber and stone with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the homestead. It's not much compared to some of the big spreads further north, Adam said, misinterpreting her silence as disappointment, but it's home. It's beautiful, Faith said honestly. My father always admired your place. A small smile touched Adam's lips as he guided the wagon toward the house. An older woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Holloway," Adam called in greeting. "This is Miss Faith Gardner from the farm to the south. She'll be helping with the harvest." The woman, presumably Adam's housekeeper, nodded in greeting. "About time you brought some help around here, Mr. Forrester. And a woman, too. Maybe she can talk some sense into you about proper meals and not working yourself to death." Faith couldn't help but smile at the woman's forthright manner and the way Adam ducked his head in embarrassment. "Mrs. Holloway's been with the ranch since before I was born," Adam explained as he helped Faith down from the wagon. "She believes it's her personal mission to ensure I don't waste away from neglect." "Someone has to look after you," Mrs. Holloway retorted good-naturedly. "Your father would haunt me if I let you survive on coffee and jerky as you'd prefer." After a brief tour of the ranch, Adam led Faith to the fields that had survived the drought. 10 acres of wheat stood golden in the morning sun, ready for harvesting. "We'll start here," Adam said, handing Faith a scythe. "I've been working on it alone for the past 2 days, but there's still plenty to do." Faith tested the weight of the tool in her hands. It was similar to the one she'd used on her own farm, though better maintained. "I hope you don't think you need to go easy on me because I'm a woman," she said, noting his appraising look. A glint of amusement flashed in Adam's eyes. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Gardner. In fact, I'm counting on you to keep up." With that challenge issued, they set to work. The rhythm of cutting wheat was familiar to Faith, and despite the heat that quickly built as the sun rose higher, she found comfort in the physical labor. It allowed her mind to focus on the task at hand rather than dwelling on her troubles. They worked steadily through the morning, breaking only briefly to drink from the canteens Adam had brought. Faith was aware of him watching her occasionally, perhaps surprised by her stamina or skill with the scythe. By midday, they had cleared a significant portion of the field. Mrs. Holloway appeared at noon with a basket containing bread, cheese, and more of those precious apples. They sat in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree at the edge of the field to eat. "You work well," Adam said after a while, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "Better than most men I've hired." Faith accepted the compliment with a nod. "My father taught me everything he knew about farming, said there was no point in having a child if you couldn't pass on your knowledge, regardless of whether that child was a son or a daughter." "He sounds like a wise man," Adam observed. "He was," Faith agreed, suddenly missing her father with an intensity that caught her off guard. He would have hated to see what's become of his farm. Adam studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "What will you do if—" "When the bank takes it?" The direct question stung, but Faith appreciated his honesty. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some skill as a seamstress. I could try to find work in town, maybe room with Mrs. Peterson above her millinery shop." The prospect filled her with dread, not because there was any shame in such work, but because it would mean the end of the independent life she'd fought so hard to maintain. "You could sell to me instead of letting the bank take it," Adam suggested quietly. Faith's head snapped up in surprise. "What?" "I've been looking to expand," he explained, his tone deliberately casual. "Your land borders mine, has good soil when there's water, and the creek would be useful once the drought breaks." He met her eyes. "I'd offer a fair price enough to settle your debt and leave you with something to start over." Faith felt a complex mixture of emotions at his offer, relief that there might be a way out of her predicament, gratitude for his consideration, but also a deep sadness at the thought of parting with her father's legacy. I need to think about it," she said finally. Adam nodded, respecting her need for time. "The offer stands whenever you're ready to decide." They returned to work after their meal, falling back into the rhythm of the harvest. By late afternoon, Faith's muscles were burning with exertion, but she pushed through the discomfort, determined not to show weakness. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Adam finally called a halt to their labor. Faith leaned on her scythe, trying not to show how grateful she was for the reprieve. "We've made good progress," Adam said, surveying the field with satisfaction. "Another day or two and we'll be finished here." Faith nodded, too tired for words. The day's work had been hard but satisfying in a way she hadn't experienced since her own crops began failing. "Come on," Adam said, gathering their tools. "Mrs. Holloway will have supper waiting, and you look ready to drop." Faith wanted to protest that she was fine, but her trembling muscles betrayed her. She followed Adam back to the ranch house, where Mrs. Holloway indeed had a hearty meal, prepared venison stew with the last of the previous year's root vegetables, fresh bread, and even a small honey cake for dessert. After cleaning up from their meal, Adam insisted on driving Faith back to her cabin despite her protests that she could walk the short distance. "It'll be dark soon," he pointed out reasonably. "And you're exhausted, though you're too stubborn to admit it." Faith couldn't argue with either observation, so she allowed him to help her into the wagon. They rode in companionable silence, the evening air cooling rapidly as the sun disappeared behind the mountains to the west. When they reached her cabin, Adam jumped down and came around to help her descend, his strong hands gripping her waist with a careful respect that Faith found oddly touching. "I'll be by at the same time tomorrow," he said, stepping back once she was safely on the ground. "Unless you need a day to recover." Faith straightened her spine despite her fatigue. "I'll be ready." A smile tugged at the corner of Adam's mouth. "I don't doubt it." As she watched him drive away, Faith realized that for the first time in months she felt something akin to hope. It wasn't just the food in her cellar or the prospect of earning wages. It was the unexpected kindness from a man she'd barely known despite their years as neighbors. A man who seemed to respect her determination and independence, even as he offered help. She entered her cabin and prepared for bed, her mind turning over Adam's offer to buy her land. The practical part of her knew it was probably the best solution, a way to pay her debts and salvage something from the disaster the drought had wrought. But her heart rebelled at the thought of giving up her father's dream, the land he'd worked so hard to develop. As she drifted toward sleep, Faith wondered what her father would advise her to do. Somehow, she suspected he would tell her that land was just soil and rocks. In the end, it was people and their kindness that truly mattered. The next several days fell into a pattern. Adam would arrive at dawn, and they would ride to his ranch together. They worked side by side through the wheat fields, gradually completing the harvest. Faith found herself looking forward to their shared lunches under the cottonwood tree, where Adam slowly began to reveal more of himself through their conversations. She learned that he'd attended a university back east for 2 years before his mother's illness had called him home. That he had a passion for literature that seemed at odds with his practical, physical nature. That despite his success as a rancher, he sometimes felt trapped by the expectations of others and the legacy his father had left him. In turn, Faith shared stories of her childhood in Missouri before her father had brought her west, of her dreams to expand the farm to include an orchard someday, of her mother whose face she knew only from a small daguerreotype her father had kept by his bedside. By the end of the week, the wheat harvest was complete, and Faith expected her temporary employment to end. But as they finished loading the last of the grain into the storage barn, Adam surprised her. "I was thinking," he said, almost hesitantly, "the vegetable garden needs tending, and there's the matter of preparing some fields for winter crops, assuming the rains finally come." He glanced at her, then away. If you're interested in continuing to work here, that is. Faith studied him, suspecting there was more to his offer than simple need for assistance. You really need help with those tasks, or are you just creating work for me out of pity? Adam's gaze snapped back to hers, a flash of irritation crossing his features. I don't offer pity, Miss Gardner. What I need is capable hands, and you've proven yours to be more than capable. His expression softened slightly. But yes, I could manage alone if necessary. The choice is yours. Faith considered his words. The truth was, she enjoyed working at the Forrester ranch. The physical labor helped quiet her troubled thoughts, and she'd grown comfortable in Adam's company. More than comfortable, if she was honest with herself, she'd begun to look forward to seeing him each day, to their conversations that ranged from practical farming matters to philosophical discussions about books they'd both read. I'd like to continue, she said finally. At least until I decide what to do about my land. Relief flickered across Adam's face. Good. We'll start on the garden tomorrow. The vegetable garden proved to be a more intimate setting for their shared labor than the expansive wheat fields had been. Working side by side in the narrow rows, their hands occasionally brushed as they pulled weeds or turned soil, each incidental touch sending an unexpected warmth through Faith's body. She found herself noticing things about Adam she hadn't before, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up slightly when he was amused, but trying not to show it. The small scar near his right eyebrow that he'd gotten as a boy trying to ride a wild Mustang. The gentleness of his calloused hands when he demonstrated how to properly thin the carrots. One afternoon, as they worked together replanting a section of the garden with cool weather crops in anticipation of the eventual return of rain, Faith decided to broach the subject that had been weighing on her mind. I've been thinking about your offer, she said, carefully patting soil around a cabbage seedling. To buy my land. Adam's hand stilled momentarily before resuming their work. And I'm not ready to give up on it yet, Faith admitted. The bank payment is due next week, but I should have enough from my wages here to make at least a partial payment, if I can convince Mr. Franklin to give me an extension. Adam sat back on his heels, wiping his brow with his sleeve. Franklin isn't known for his patience or generosity. I know, Faith sighed, but it's my father's land. I can't just surrender it without trying everything possible first. Adam was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance. What if there was another way? He asked finally. Faith looked up, curious. What do you mean? I've been thinking, he said slowly, as if working out the idea as he spoke. Your land and mine, they complement each other. Your soil is better suited for certain crops than mine, while I have the advantage of the spring. He met her eyes directly. What if, instead of me buying your land outright, we formed a partnership? Faith blinked in surprise. A partnership. You would keep ownership of your land, but we would work both properties together, sharing resources and dividing the profits, Adam explained, his words coming more quickly now as his enthusiasm for the idea grew. I could divert some water from my spring to your fields once the pipeline is built. You have skills I lack in certain areas of farming, and I have resources you need. The proposal caught Faith completely off guard. A business partnership between a man and woman who weren't related was unusual enough, but one involving land and farming was practically unheard of. People would talk, she said, voicing her first concern. Adam shrugged. People always talk. Does that matter more than saving your farm? It didn't, of course, but Faith was still trying to process the unexpected suggestion. How would it work exactly, legally, I mean? We draw up a contract, Adam said. Make everything official through Mr. Hayes, the lawyer in town. Your land remains yours, mine remains mine, but we operate them as a single enterprise. He hesitated. It would mean working together permanently, not just during this drought. Is that something you could consider? Faith found herself staring at Adam, seeing him anew in light of this proposal. Most men would have simply waited for her to fail, then purchased her land at a fraction of its worth. Or they would have offered marriage as the solution to her problems, expecting her to surrender her independence along with her property rights. Instead, Adam was suggesting a partnership of equals, an arrangement that respected her ownership and recognized her skills while providing the practical support she desperately needed. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "It's a big decision." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, but remember, the bank won't wait forever." That evening, as Adam drove her home, an unusual silence hung between them. Faith's mind was racing, considering all angles of his proposition. It seemed too good to be true, in many ways a solution that would allow her to keep her land while solving her immediate financial problems. Yet she couldn't help but wonder about Adam's motivations. Was this purely a business decision on his part? Did he see some advantage she was missing? Or was there another reason he wanted to maintain this connection between them? As they reached her cabin, Adam helped her down from the wagon as usual, but this time he lingered, his hands remaining at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Faith," he said, his voice lower than normal, "I want you to know that my offer comes with no expectations. If you agree to the partnership, it would be strictly business." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. Unless you wanted it to be more someday." Faith's breath caught in her throat as she met his gaze in the fading light. There was an intensity in his blue eyes she hadn't seen before, a vulnerability that made her heart beat faster. "Adam, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "Just know that while my proposal is sincere as a business matter, my feelings for you have grown these past weeks." He stepped back, releasing her waist. "Think about the partnership. We can discuss the rest another time." With that, he returned to his wagon and drove away, leaving Faith standing before her cabin, her thoughts in even greater turmoil than before. That night, sleep eluded her. Adam's proposal, both the business arrangement and his hint at deeper feelings, kept circling in her mind. The practical aspects of a partnership made sense. Combined, their lands would create a more viable operation, less vulnerable to the whims of weather and markets. His spring water could indeed save her fields once the drought broke, and her knowledge of crop rotation and soil management would benefit his land as well. But it was the personal implications that gave her pause. Faith had spent the years since her father's death proving she didn't need a man to survive. Accepting Adam's help, even as an equal partner, felt like a concession somehow. Yet wasn't there a difference between needing someone and choosing to join forces with them? Her father had often said that the strongest buildings had multiple support beams, not because any one beam was insufficient, but because together they could withstand forces that would topple a single post. And then there was the matter of Adam's feelings, and if she was honest, her own growing attraction to him. Working alongside him these past weeks, she'd come to admire not just his strength and determination, but his quiet intelligence, his dry humor, his unwavering integrity. The way he treated her as an equal, despite society's views on a woman's proper place, had touched her deeply. By morning, Faith had made her decision. She would accept Adam's partnership proposal, but insist on clear terms that protected her interests and independence. As for his personal feelings and her own confusing emotions, those would need time to sort themselves out naturally. When Adam arrived at dawn, Faith was waiting on her porch, dressed and ready. He approached cautiously, clearly uncertain about her reaction to his revelations the previous evening. "Good morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Good morning, Adam," Faith replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've been thinking about your proposal." And the single word carried a weight of anticipation. "I'd like to accept with certain conditions," Faith said, maintaining her composure despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "First, everything must be legally documented with clear provisions for how decisions are made and profits divided." Adam nodded. "Absolutely. I wouldn't have it any other way." "Second," Faith continued, "I maintain full ownership of my land with no claim on it by you or your heirs should anything happen to me." "Agreed," Adam said without hesitation. "Third," and here Faith felt her resolve wavering slightly, "regarding your personal feelings, I can't make any promises, Adam. I've grown to respect you, to enjoy your company, but I'm not ready to think beyond friendship right now." Adam's expression softened, a small smile touching his lips. "I understand, Faith. I didn't speak of my feelings to pressure you, only to be honest. The partnership stands on its own merits, regardless of anything else that might or might not develop between us." Relief washed through Faith. "Then we have an agreement," she said, extending her hand in a businesslike gesture. Adam took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he turned it gently and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both respectful and intimate that sent a surprising warmth through Faith's body. "We should see Mr. Hayes today," he said, releasing her hand. "Get the agreement drawn up before your bank payment is due." Faith nodded, still feeling the imprint of his lips on her skin. "Yes, that would be wise." The trip to town that day marked a turning point in Faith's fortunes. Mr. Hayes, the town lawyer, was initially skeptical about their proposed arrangement, but eventually drew up the legal documents they requested. The partnership agreement clearly outlined their respective contributions, responsibilities, and profit sharing, with explicit protections for Faith's continued ownership of her land. From there, they visited the bank, where Mr. Franklin was surprisingly accommodating once Adam explained their new business arrangement and made it clear that Faith's loan payments would be made on time going forward. The banker's attitude shift wasn't lost on Faith. The simple presence of a respected male rancher beside her had opened doors that had previously been firmly closed. "That's the way of the world," Adam said ruefully as they left the bank. "Unfair as it is, a man's word carries weight that a woman's often doesn't, no matter how capable she might be." Faith appreciated his awareness of the injustice, even as she chafed at the reality of it. "At least the partnership is legally binding," she said. "No one can question my rights under it." Adam smiled at her practical outlook. "No, they can't. And soon enough, they'll see what I already know, that Gardner and Forrester together will create something greater than either of us could alone." Over the next month, their partnership began to take shape. Adam helped Faith make repairs to her cabin and barn that had been neglected due to lack of funds. Together they began planning for the coming season, assuming the drought would eventually break. Adam proposed diverting some of his spring water to Faith's land through a series of irrigation channels, an ambitious project that would require significant labor, but could transform the productivity of her fields. As they worked side by side each day, the initial awkwardness that had followed Adam's confession of feelings gradually faded, replaced by a comfortable camaraderie punctuated by moments of tension that neither of them acknowledged openly. Faith found herself noticing the way Adam's shirts strained across his broad shoulders as he worked, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to an injured animal. For his part, Adam was true to his word, never pressuring Faith or making unwelcome advances. But she sometimes caught him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch, his blue eyes reflecting emotions he kept carefully controlled. By mid-September, subtle changes in the air hinted at the approach of autumn, though the drought showed little sign of abating. Faith and Adam had settled into a routine, dividing their time between both properties as needed. One evening, as they finished a late dinner at Adam's ranch after a long day of work, Mrs. Holloway set a letter beside Adam's plate. "Nearly forgot to give you this," she said. "Came yesterday with the supply wagon from Tucson." Adam opened the envelope and scanned the contents, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read. "Bad news?" Faith asked when he finally set the letter down. Adam hesitated. "My cousin James in California. He's offering me a position managing his new ranch near Sacramento." He glanced at Faith. It would be a significant opportunity, larger operation, better water supply, access to the San Francisco markets. Faith felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "You're considering it?" "No," Adam said immediately, then amended, "Well, I would have before." He gestured between them. "Before our partnership, before you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. "You shouldn't dismiss it so quickly," Faith said, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the dismay she felt at the thought of Adam leaving. "It sounds like an excellent opportunity." Adam studied her face. "Is that what you want? For me to go?" "Of course not," Faith replied, more sharply than she intended. "But I won't be the reason you sacrifice a chance at something better." Adam's expression softened. "Faith, nothing in California interests me compared to what I'm building here." He reached across the table and took her hand. "What we're building here." Faith looked down at their joined hands, her heart racing at both his touch and his words. "Adam." A sudden, dramatic crack of thunder interrupted her, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Faith and Adam exchanged startled glances before rushing to the window. The sky, which had been clear when they'd entered for dinner, was now dark with roiling clouds. As they watched, a jagged bolt of lightning split the heavens, followed almost immediately by another deafening clap of thunder. "Could it be?" Faith whispered, hardly daring to hope. As if in answer to her question, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, striking the parched earth with audible impacts. Within moments, the isolated drops transformed into a deluge, water streaming down the window panes in sheets. Adam let out a whoop of joy and grabbed Faith by the waist, spinning her in an impromptu dance of celebration. "Rain!" he shouted, his face alight with happiness. "It's finally raining," Faith laughed, caught up in his exuberance and the sheer relief of the drought's end. When Adam set her down, they remained standing close together, his hands still at her waist, hers resting on his shoulders. "The rain," Faith said softly, suddenly aware of their proximity. "I should get back to my place, make sure everything's secure." Adam shook his head. "Not in this storm." "It's too dangerous." His eyes searched hers. "Stay. Mrs. Holloway can prepare the guest room." The sensible part of Faith knew he was right. Riding through a thunderstorm at night was foolhardy. But staying at Adam's ranch overnight, even with Mrs. Holloway as chaperone, would certainly cause gossip in town. "People will talk," she said, echoing her earlier concern about their partnership. Adam's gaze remained steady on hers. "Let them. We know the truth." His expression grew more serious. "Faith, I meant what I said. I'm not interested in California or anywhere else. My future is here with this land." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "With you, if you'll have me." The rain pounded against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. In that moment, with Adam looking at her as though she were the answer to every question he'd ever asked. Faith felt something inside her shift, a wall she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. "I'm not ready to make any declarations," she said honestly. "But I'm not asking you to leave either." She took a deep breath. "I want you to stay, Adam. I want to see where this partnership, all aspects of it, might lead." The smile that transformed Adam's face was like sunrise after a long night. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Faith responded, her hand sliding up to the nape of his neck as the kiss deepened, becoming something more certain, more passionate. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I'll have Mrs. Holloway prepare the guest room," he murmured. "And tomorrow, once the storm passes, we'll go to your farm and see what the rain has brought." The thunderstorm continued through the night, the steady drumming of rain on the roof lulling Faith to sleep in the comfortable guest room. She woke at dawn to find the world transformed, the air clean and fresh, the parched landscape already showing hints of green where dormant seeds had been waiting for moisture to spring to life. Adam was waiting for her on the porch, 2 cups of steaming coffee in hand. "Good morning," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Sleep well." Faith accepted the coffee with a smile. "Better than I have in months." She gazed out at the rain-washed landscape. "It's beautiful." "Yes," Adam agreed, though his eyes remained fixed on her face rather than the scenery. "Shall we ride to your place after breakfast? See how things fared in the storm?" They set out an hour later, picking their way carefully along the muddy road. The transformation of the land was even more evident in daylight. What had been dusty, lifeless soil just yesterday was now dark with moisture, with tiny green shoots already visible in places where seeds had lain dormant. As they approached Faith's farm, she gasped at the sight that greeted them. The creek bed that had been dry for months now flowed with water, not the raging torrent it would become with sustained rainfall, but a steady, life-giving stream that wound its way through her property. "The creek," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "It's back." Adam reached across from his horse to squeeze her hand. "And it will fill again properly with more rain. The drought is breaking, Faith." They rode the perimeter of her land, assessing the impact of the storm. There was some minor damage to her barn roof from the wind, but nothing that couldn't be easily repaired. More importantly, the soil had eagerly absorbed the rainfall, transforming from cracked, dusty earth to rich, promising ground ready for planting. "We should start preparing fields as soon as the ground is workable," Adam said as they dismounted near Faith's cabin. "There's still time to get winter wheat in, and come spring, we can expand with more variety." Faith nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities now that water had returned to her land. "The irrigation channels you proposed would still be valuable," she said. "Even with the drought ending, having a reliable water supply from your spring would make a huge difference." Adam smiled at her practical focus. "Agreed. We'll start planning the route once the ground dries enough to survey properly." They spent the day at Faith's farm, making minor repairs and discussing their strategy for the coming planting season. The rain continued intermittently, gentle showers that further nourished the thirsty earth without causing the flash floods that sometimes followed prolonged drought. By late afternoon, they had developed a comprehensive plan for both properties, leveraging their complementary strengths and resources. Adam's experience with cattle would allow them to introduce livestock to portions of Faith's land unsuitable for crops, while her skill with vegetables and fruit would diversify the Forrester ranch's output. As the sun began to set, painting the rain-washed sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. Adam and Faith sat on her porch, enjoying the cool, moist breeze that had replaced the hot, dry winds of summer. "This is going to work," Faith said, conviction in her voice as she gazed out at her land, their land in many ways, though ownership remained separate. "Our partnership." "Yes," Adam agreed, his gaze on her profile. "It is." He hesitated before adding, "all aspects of it, I hope." Faith turned to meet his eyes, reading the question in their blue depths. In the weeks since their first kiss, they had developed a deeper understanding of each other, their initial attraction evolving into something more substantial. They worked well together, challenged each other's assumptions, found joy in shared accomplishments and comfort in each other's presence during setbacks. "Adam," she began slowly, "I've been thinking about your cousin's offer." A shadow crossed his face. "I told you I'm not interested in California." "I know," Faith assured him, "and I believe you, but it made me realize something." She took a deep breath. "If you had decided to go, I would have been devastated, not just because of our business arrangement, but because I've come to care for you deeply." The shadow lifted, replaced by a cautious hope. "Faith, let me finish," she said gently. "All my life I've prided myself on my independence, on not needing anyone. After my father died, I was determined to prove I could manage on my own." She smiled ruefully. "And then the drought came, and I learned that sometimes even the strongest person needs help." Adam listened intently, giving her the space to express thoughts she'd been processing for weeks. "What I've come to understand," Faith continued, "is that there's a difference between needing someone because you're weak and choosing to join with someone because together you create something stronger than either of you could alone." She reached for his hand. "That's what we have, Adam, a partnership in the truest sense. In business, yes, but also in love," Adam suggested softly when she faltered. Faith's heart quickened at the word she'd been circling but hadn't quite been ready to voice. "Yes," she admitted, "in love." Adam's face transformed with joy as he gathered her hands in his. "I've loved you since before the rain came," he confessed. "Since those days in the wheat field when you worked alongside me without complaint, despite the heat and exhaustion. When you spoke of your father's land with such passion and determination." He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I love your strength, your intelligence, your stubbornness. I love that you didn't immediately fall into my arms when I offered help, that you demanded a partnership of equals instead." Faith laughed softly at his accurate assessment of her character. "And I love your generosity, your quiet wisdom, the way you see me as I am and value me for it." She sobered. "But Adam, I still want our partnership to continue as we planned. I don't want to be just your wife, losing myself and my independence in marriage." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I wouldn't want that either. What makes you remarkable is precisely your independence and strength." He squeezed her hands. "So we continue as partners in business, and perhaps someday become partners in marriage as well, but always as equals, always respecting each other's separate identities even as we build something together." Relief and happiness flooded through Faith. "Yes," she said simply. "That's exactly what I want." Adam's smile was radiant as he leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and understanding. When they separated, he kept her close, their foreheads touching. "Faith Gardner," he murmured, "will you do me the honor of continuing to be my business partner and perhaps, in time, considering becoming my life partner as well?" Faith laughed at his careful wording, so typical of Adam's respect for her independence. "Yes to both," she said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "Though I might need a proper proposal for the second part when the time comes." Adam's answering laugh was joyous. "I promise it will be worthy of you." They sealed their agreement with another kiss, this one longer and deeper, filled with the promise of the future they would build together, a future suddenly rich with possibilities after the hardship of the drought. As autumn progressed into winter, the rains continued. Not the torrential downpours of that first dramatic storm, but steady, nourishing precipitation that gradually replenished the parched earth and refilled streams and wells throughout the territory. Faith and Adam worked diligently to implement their plans, planting winter wheat on both properties and beginning construction of the irrigation channels that would connect Adam's spring to Faith's fields. Word of their unusual partnership spread through Fort Bowie, generating predictable gossip and speculation. Some dismissed it as a temporary arrangement that would inevitably end in marriage and Faith's absorption into the Forrester ranch. Others were more critical, suggesting impropriety despite the legal documentation of their business relationship. Faith and Adam weathered the talk with equanimity, focusing on their work and the increasingly personal relationship developing between them. They maintained separate residences, Adam at his ranch, Faith at her farm, but spent most days together, moving between the two properties as work demanded. By early spring of 1879, the visible results of their partnership began to silence even the most persistent critics. The winter wheat was thriving on both properties. The completed irrigation system ensured Faith's fields would never again be completely at the mercy of drought, and Adam's ranch had diversified with vegetable gardens and fruit tree seedlings under Faith's expert guidance. Their personal relationship had deepened as well, evolving from tentative expressions of feeling into a solid bond built on mutual respect, shared goals, and growing love. They still had occasional disagreements. Both were strong-willed individuals with decided opinions, but they had developed a pattern of honest communication that allowed them to work through conflicts productively. On a perfect spring day, with wildflowers carpeting the hillsides and the scent of new growth perfuming the air, Adam asked Faith to accompany him on a ride to a special location on his property. He led her to a gentle rise overlooking both their lands, where the boundaries between the Forrester ranch and the Gardner farm were visible but increasingly blurred by their collaborative work. "I wanted you to see this view," Adam said as they dismounted, "to see what we've accomplished together." Faith gazed out at the landscape spread before them, fields of green where once there had been only dust, the silver ribbon of the creek now running full, the irrigation channels connecting their properties in a physical manifestation of their partnership. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Better than I could have imagined when the drought had me in despair." Adam took her hand. "Faith, these past months have been the happiest of my life, working with you, building something meaningful together, falling more deeply in love with you each day." He drew a deep breath. "I meant what I said last fall. I want us to always be partners, equals in everything we do." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I had this made special," he explained as he opened it to reveal a ring unlike any Faith had seen before, two bands of gold intertwined but distinct, set with small diamonds where they crossed. "Two separate circles, joined but individual," Adam explained, his voice husky with emotion. "Like us." Faith stared at the symbolic ring, tears welling in her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the design. "Faith Gardner," Adam said, dropping to one knee before her, "will you marry me? Not as my possession or subordinate, but as my equal partner in all things in our business, our land, and our life together." Faith's heart swelled with love for this man who understood so perfectly what she needed, not just the words of equality, but the genuine belief in it that informed his every action toward her. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Yes, Adam Forrester, I will marry you as your equal partner in all things." Adam slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her with a passion that spoke of both love and promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he smiled down at her with such joy that Faith felt her own happiness multiplying in response. "I have one more surprise," Adam said, taking her hand and leading her a short distance to where a patch of freshly turned earth marked a recent planting. Small green shoots were just beginning to emerge from the soil. "What is this?" Faith asked, bending to examine the tiny plants. "Apple saplings," Adam explained. "The first of the orchard you always wanted. I ordered them from a nursery in California months ago, had them delivered last week while you were visiting Mrs. Peterson in town." Faith's eyes widened in surprise and delight. "An orchard, here?" Adam nodded. "The first phase of many, I thought. I thought we might build our home here eventually. A new house on the border between our properties." He gestured to the flat area nearby, "with the orchard surrounding it, connecting our lands just as we connect our lives." The vision he described was so perfect, so aligned with Faith's own deepest wishes, that for a moment she couldn't speak past the emotion constricting her throat. Instead, she threw her arms around him, pouring all her love and gratitude into an embrace that spoke more eloquently than words. When she finally found her voice, she whispered, "It's perfect, Adam. All of it, the ring, the orchard, the home we'll build together." They were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony attended by friends and neighbors from Fort Bowie. Mr. Hayes, who had drawn up their partnership agreement, had the honor of officiating, while Mrs. Holloway wept openly from the front row. True to their commitment to equality, Faith and Adam wrote their own vows, promising to respect each other's independence even as they joined their lives, to support each other's dreams as fervently as their own, to build something greater together than either could create alone. After the ceremony, they hosted a celebration at the Forrester Ranch, where even the most skeptical townspeople had to acknowledge the success of their unconventional partnership. The once parched lands were now vibrant with life, producing crops that not only sustained both households but generated surplus for sale in Fort Bowie and beyond. As the sun set on their wedding day, Adam led Faith to the hill where he had proposed, now marked by the foundation of the home they were building together. The apple saplings had grown several inches since their planting, their slender trunks supported by stakes against the occasional strong winds. "Mrs. Forrester," Adam said, using her new name with evident pleasure, "welcome home." Faith smiled up at her husband, her partner in all things. "It's Gardner Forrester, remember," she corrected gently, having decided to hyphenate her name as another symbol of their equal partnership. Adam laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Faith Gardner Forrester," he amended. "Forgive me, I'm still getting used to the idea that you're actually my wife." "And business partner," Faith added with a teasing smile. "Don't forget that part." "Never," Adam promised, his expression growing serious. Without that partnership, we might never have found our way to this moment. Faith thought back to the depths of the drought, when despair had nearly overwhelmed her. "When you first came to my farm offering help, I was so resistant," she recalled. "So determined to make it on my own or fail trying." "And I admired you for that strength," Adam said, "even as I hoped you'd accept my help." "I'm glad I did," Faith admitted. "Not just because it saved my farm, but because it brought you into my life in a way I never expected." Adam kissed her softly. "The drought may have killed your crops and left you broke, Faith, but it also created the circumstances that brought us together. I shared my harvest with you, yes, but you've given me far more in return." Faith leaned into his embrace, understanding the truth of his words. From the devastation of the drought had grown something precious and enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and deep love. The seeds Adam had planted, both literal and metaphorical, had flourished into a harvest more bountiful than either of them could have imagined in those desperate, dry days. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Faith and Adam stood together on the land they shared, surrounded by the visible signs of their collaborative efforts: the growing orchard, the foundation of their future home, the thriving fields stretching out below them. The drought had tested them, bringing Faith to the brink of losing everything she valued, but through that hardship, she had found a partnership and a love that would sustain her through whatever challenges the future might hold. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Faith smiled, looking out over their joint accomplishment. "That sometimes the end of one dream can be the beginning of a better one." Adam tightened his arms around her. "And our dream is just beginning." Together they watched the moon rise over the land they had nurtured back to health, their future stretching before them as promising and fertile as the fields below, a future they would cultivate together, as equals, partners in every sense of the word. 5 years later, the Gardner Forrester homestead had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. The house Adam and Faith had built on the boundary between their original properties stood proud amid the flourishing apple orchard, which had expanded each year, and now produced enough fruit to supply not only local needs, but to ship to markets as far away as Tucson and even San Francisco. Their irrigation system, initially designed simply to bring water from Adam's spring to Faith's fields, had evolved into an innovative network that captured and distributed rainwater throughout both properties, making them remarkably resilient even during drier seasons. Agricultural experts from as far away as California had visited to study their methods. On a warm autumn afternoon, Faith sat on the wide porch of their home, watching Adam lead their 3-year-old son, Thomas, named after Adam's father, on a tour of the nearest apple trees. The boy's delighted laughter carried on the breeze as Adam lifted him up to touch the ripening fruit, his tiny fingers gently testing each apple as Faith had taught him. Beside Faith, in a handcrafted cradle, their 6-month-old daughter, Eleanor, named for Faith's mother, slept peacefully, one small fist curled beside her rosy cheek. The children were the joyful embodiment of Adam and Faith's partnership: Thomas, with Adam's blue eyes but Faith's determined chin; Eleanor, already showing signs of Faith's auburn hair, combined with her father's thoughtful gaze. Mrs. Holloway emerged from the house with a tray bearing coffee and fresh apple cake. Though she had initially stayed at the original Forrester ranch house after Adam and Faith's marriage, she had eventually moved into a comfortable suite in their new home, declaring that someone needed to keep an eye on those two workaholics and make sure they remember to eat. "Those apples are coming in beautifully this year," Mrs. Holloway observed as she set the tray on the small table beside Faith. "Best crop yet, I'd say." Faith nodded in agreement. "The new varieties Adam ordered from back east are thriving." She smiled as she watched her husband and son now examining a cluster of late summer wildflowers that had sprung up between the trees. "Everything we plant seems to flourish now." Mrs. Holloway followed her gaze, her expression softening. "Not just the plants," she said knowingly, nodding toward Thomas and the sleeping Eleanor. "I remember when you first came to work at the ranch during the drought, so thin and worried, but still standing straight as a lodgepole pine." Faith laughed at the description. "I was terrified of losing my father's land, but too proud to admit how desperate things had become. And now look at you," Mrs. Holloway said with satisfaction. Part of the most successful farming operation in 3 counties, mother to those beautiful children, and still standing straight only now with Adam beside you instead of across from you. The older woman's observation was apt. The partnership that had begun as a practical arrangement to save Faith's farm had evolved into something extraordinary, a true blending of lives, land, and purpose that had transformed both Faith and Adam in the process. Their legal partnership had expanded to include a proper company, Gardner Forrester Agricultural Enterprises, which now employed several local workers and had diversified beyond crops and cattle to include beekeeping for honey production, a small dairy operation overseen by Faith, and experimental cultivation of plants not typically grown in the Arizona territory. Throughout their marriage, Faith and Adam had maintained their commitment to equality. Major decisions were made jointly, their individual strengths complementing each other in both business and family matters. Faith's independent spirit had not diminished, but had found its perfect counterpart in Adam's steadfast support and respect. Adam approached the porch now, carrying a tired but happy Thomas on his shoulders. "I think someone's ready for his afternoon nap," he said, lifting the boy down and setting him on his feet. "We inspected every apple in the north orchard, didn't we, son?" Thomas nodded solemnly, his eyelids already drooping. "Apples not ready yet, Mama," he reported to Faith. "Still need more sun." Faith smiled at her son's serious assessment. "That's very good information, Thomas. Thank you for checking." She stood and took his hand. "Let's get you settled for your nap, and when you wake up, we can check on the beehives together." Once Thomas was tucked into his bed, and Alina was still sleeping soundly in her cradle on the porch under Mrs. Holloway's watchful eye, Faith rejoined Adam, who had moved to their favorite spot at the edge of the orchard. From this vantage point, they could see across both their original properties, now seamlessly integrated into one thriving operation. Adam slipped an arm around Faith's waist as she reached his side. "Happy?" he asked, a question he posed often, not out of insecurity but genuine desire to ensure her contentment. Faith leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Very," she assured him, "though I was just thinking about how close I came to losing all of this before it even began." Adam knew she was referring not to their children or marriage, but to the land itself, the foundation upon which they had built everything else. "The drought," he said, understanding immediately. "It seems like another lifetime now." Faith nodded. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to my farm that day with your proposition." She smiled at the memory. "If you hadn't been so stubborn about helping me." Adam chuckled. "If anyone was stubborn in that scenario, it was you, Faith Gardner Forrester. I distinctly recall offering simple assistance and being firmly rebuffed by a certain proud farm woman." "Fair point," Faith conceded with a laugh. "But you persisted, and eventually offered a partnership instead of charity. That made all the difference." Adam turned to face her fully, his expression growing serious. "You know, I had been watching your farm struggling for weeks before I finally got up the courage to approach you. I'd admired you from afar for years, how you took over after your father died, how you expanded the vegetable gardens, how you stood up to Franklin at the bank when he tried to change the terms of your loan." Faith raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You knew about that?" Adam nodded. "I was in the bank that day, in the back office discussing cattle prices with Franklin when you came in. I heard everything, how clearly you explained your rights under the loan agreement, how you refused to be intimidated." He smiled at the memory. "I think I started falling in love with you that day, though we'd barely exchanged 10 words at that point. And yet you waited until the drought to come calling," Faith teased, though she was touched by his revelation. "I wanted to approach you sooner," Adam admitted. "But you seemed so determined to make it on your own. I respected that, even as I looked for an opportunity to get to know you better." He shrugged slightly. "The drought gave me that opportunity, though I hated seeing you struggle." Faith reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that 5 years of laughter and Arizona sun had etched around his eyes. "Well, Mr. Forrester, I'd say your patience paid off." "It certainly did, Mrs. Gardner Forrester," he agreed, lowering his head to kiss her with the same tenderness that still made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. When they parted, Faith looked out once more at their flourishing land. "You know, my father used to say that the harshest trials often bear the sweetest fruits if you have the fortitude to endure them." Adam followed her gaze to where their children's laughter had earlier filled the orchard. "Wise man, your father. I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," Faith said with certainty. "Especially once he saw how you respected my independence rather than trying to diminish it." Adam smiled. "I fell in love with your strength and determination, Faith. Why would I ever want to change what I admire most about you?" As the afternoon sun filtered through the apple trees, casting dappled shadows across the land that had once seemed doomed by drought, but now thrived under their joint care, Faith reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperation and near ruin had grown prosperity, partnership, and a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. The seeds Adam had planted, both literal and metaphorical, had yielded a harvest beyond measure. In the distance, the creek that had once run dry now flowed steady and clear, its waters supplemented by the innovative irrigation system they had designed together. Beside it, fields that had cracked and withered in the drought now stood lush and productive. And here, on the borderland between what had once been 2 separate properties, their home and orchard stood as testament to what could be accomplished when 2 independent spirits chose to join forces without sacrificing their individual strengths. "I wouldn't change a thing," Faith said softly. "Not even the drought. Without it, we might never have found our way to this." Adam tightened his arm around her waist. "Then we should be grateful for it, terrible as it was. Sometimes the end of one dream truly is the beginning of a better one." As if in agreement, a gentle breeze stirred the apple trees, their branches heavy with fruit nearly ready for harvest, a bounty born from partnership, perseverance, and the love that had grown between 2 people who had discovered that true strength lay not in stubborn independence, but in the choice to build something meaningful together.